Hello everyone, welcome back. Thanks for being here. The topic this time is going to be how to deal with toxic people. I am not sure if it still feels good to me to do these every week. So I might start doing them less often. This is going to be a really intense month for me. I'm moving. I don't know where yet. I have a lot of other stuff going on. It's just going to be crazy. So I think I just want to take like some personal time. But I also just kind of want to feel it out. If next week I feel inspired to do another episode, then I'll do one. I might go to once a month. We'll see what happens. The algorithm's really going to punish me if I start publishing less often. I hate these algorithms so much. But I trust that if I just meet my needs, it's going to be okay. So, anyway, I don't think I have enough listeners now that you guys are going to like expect an episode every week, but just in case anyone is, I am throwing that out there. All right, so toxic people. First of all, there's toxic people, and then there's people who can be toxic sometimes. And I think everyone can be toxic sometimes. INFJs and INFPs were usually peacemakers, but even we can be toxic sometimes, especially if we feel like we're being invalidated or violated somehow, manipulated. Anyone can be toxic sometimes. I think it's important to not like judge yourself if you feel like you've done that in the past. Just observe it. If it's something you want to change, you can focus on that. But guilt and shame are just kind of gonna hold you down. So you can have regret, I think, without getting really stuck in guilt and shame. You can have regret and take responsibility with that, but also kind of like be kind to yourself also. So the toxic people label, it's a spectrum. On like the extreme end, you have narcissists and sociopaths, people who have no empathy. And I don't want to stigmatize narcissistic personality disorder, antisocial personality disorder, but people with those disorders can lack empathy. Sometimes their brain just doesn't have capacity biologically for it, to the best of my knowledge. I was worried about doing this episode because I feel like there's going to be therapists who like hear this and they're like, this woman has no business talking about this stuff. She has no idea what she's talking about. But my best friend growing up was a sociopath. She tried to sleep with my boyfriend. She was cheating on her boyfriend all the time. She was stealing stuff all the time. And there's people who do that who aren't sociopaths, right? But like this girl had no remorse. Like she kicked my dog. I mean, she was just not a good person. I would like to think that she's changed now. People can change. In her case, I would guess that it's just a permanent dysfunction, but I can't say that for sure. I had a boss who was a narcissist. I would just feel like this donkey with a carrot that was dangling in front of my face. Like, if you just work a little bit harder, you'll get rewarded. If you just work a little bit harder, you'll get rewarded. And like, it got to the point where I was working 12 to 16 hours a day. Like, it was ridiculous. And I mean, he did some really inappropriate things. And yeah, so I've had a little bit of experience. But this is all, I'm flagging this all as my opinion again. And we're going to kind of jump around because my notes are a little bit disorganized today, but hopefully you can stick with me. So some games that toxic people play, and this is not necessarily people on the extreme end, this could be anyone, are people who do you favors because they expect something from you. So like, if you have a friend who like brings you food because like she expects you to help her with something else later, that's not really fair, because that's like putting you in debt, that in a debt that you didn't sign up for, right? It wasn't like, hey, like, I want your help with this, can I trade you some food? That's like an agreement that you enter into, right? But when somebody does a favor for you because they expect something from you, that's not really fair. You know, like, if your parents like pay for a family vacation and then it doesn't go the way they want, and they like treat you like you're ungrateful because they spent all this money on this vacation, like, that's not fair, right? They're putting you in debt that you didn't sign up for, right? Like, you can't help having feelings, you can't help how a vacation goes. Like, you're allowed to have feelings, you know, like, family dynamics are always gonna have hiccups, and so those are just some examples of debts. I mean, I feel like there's like endless examples that you could use with that. But that's not really fair, right? And that's a game that it's not even always a game, right? Like, if somebody's offering you food with like the idea that like, I need this person's help, like, that's an obvious one, but some people don't even realize they're doing it. If somebody does you a favor and then like holds it against you, that's not fair. It's not fair. Like, when you do someone a favor, there should be nothing attached to it. And that goes for us too. So if you're trying to decide how to handle toxic people, I think it depends on a lot, right? Like, some people don't know that they're in toxic relationships until they learn about this stuff, and then they're like, oh my God, what do I do? Like, I have to do something about this now. Like, my wife is toxic. Am I supposed to divorce her now? I want you to know, like, you don't have to do anything. This is just, like, knowledge that you can use. You don't have to make, like, any knee-jerk decisions or judgments. It's just information that you can take moving forward. I think those kinds of answers are things like, now that you have the information, now you can observe what's happening from like a wider perspective. You can try to change the dynamic. The decision comes later, once you've tried to change the dynamic. You don't have to do anything right now, but just be more aware of it and observe it more closely. So I think one important question when you're trying to decide what to do with toxic people is, are they capable of empathy or not? Again, the people who are not capable of empathy are on the extreme end of the spectrum. Nothing's ever their fault. They're not going to go to therapy because the problem is everyone else. So those people logically aren't going to change without therapy, but they're also not going to go because they don't have the empathy required to have the self-awareness to seek therapy. So it's tricky. It's tricky. So I think one important thing to ask yourself is, do they have empathy? Do they show remorse? Do they apologize when they make mistakes? Do they care about other people's feelings? Another question that might matter to you, it might not, is, are they mentally ill? What is their mental illness? Are they seeking treatment for that mental illness? You know, like I have anxiety that causes me to kind of steamroll people sometimes. But I'm at least conscious of it. I'm at least working on it. Um, it sometimes it makes me like accuse people of things that aren't true, um, and that can cause a toxic dynamic. So, you know, is it a mental illness? Do you know what the mental illness is? Are they working on that mental illness? That's another question you could ask. Are they open to feedback? Um, Another thing I think people struggle with is like we're always worried about other people, right? Like we don't want to shut the door on someone. We want to believe that anyone can change. We don't want to like shut the door on an important relationship um forever. Like we want to leave room for them to change, right? Like we want room for them in the relationship if they can learn to treat us better. And if you shut the door on them, then it's like you're never going to know if they've changed, if you want them back in your life. There's like some sort of comfort in knowing where they are on the map, I think. Um, so a thought that helps me is you don't have to choose who you want in your life. You just have to choose how you want to be treated. And then whether they meet the criteria at that point is up to them. You don't have to make a judgment that way. You don't have to say, you're in my life and you're not. You just say, this is what I'm willing to put up with. And then they're out unless they meet that criteria, and then they're in. So that way it feels less mean. It feels like we are leaving them room to change because we want to believe in these people. It kind of makes it their choice instead of ours. Another game to be aware of, there's an acronym called DARVO. This is, what's the word I'm looking for? DARVO is a pattern that happens in abusive relationships. And basically what it is blame shifting. I'm trying to remember what the acronym stands for. But it's basically like you bring up an issue and they somehow twist it around and blame you for something so that they're now the victim, right? And it's like you never get to be the victim. They're always out victiming you. You know, like they'll redirect, like you say, hey, like I really didn't like it when you did this thing. And they're like, well, you did that thing last week. Like that's not fair fighting rules, right? Like when you bring up an issue, it's not time for them to bring up other past issues, right? Each conversation is just about that specific issue. And if they want to talk about those past issues, maybe that's important, but they don't get to do it as ammunition against the issue that you're trying to talk about. Shoulding is also kind of a toxic game, but I think we even should on ourselves a lot of the time. Like, you shouldn't date him, or you shouldn't feel that way. You know, like we even do that to ourselves. Like, I shouldn't want this, or I should work harder. Shoulding, like, shoulds don't matter, like, unless they work, and they don't. Like, I should work harder. That's just guilt and shame energy. That's not helpful. If you're going to work harder, you're not going to do it from a place of guilt and shame. And shoulding is basically a trigger for guilt and shame most of the time. No one, I think, everyone does it. No one means to use it as like a toxic game necessarily. I'm not going to say no one, but I think because it's so commonly used, a lot of people kind of use it without thinking. So if you feel like you're always attracting toxic people, there there's probably like an energy that you're sending out. They're really attracted to like people who they can guilt and shame. So if you learn to just not feel guilt and shame, or not let other people trigger guilt or shame in you, you're going to be less attractive to those people. So if you feel like you're attracting those toxic people, think about, do I let them trigger guilt or shame in me? And then just remember that that guilt and shame is not yours. Usually it's theirs. Usually they feel guilt and shame about something and they're trying to put it on you. But even if you can't see where their guilt and shame is coming from, that's still what they're feeding off of, is triggering it in you. So if you just like, I'm not going to let you guilt me, I'm not going to feel shame about that, that will kind of drive them away, hopefully. There's a few different things. I mean, standing up for yourself doesn't work with all toxic people. Sometimes it just feeds them. So it's something worth trying, but some toxic people, like, the only thing you can do is go non-contact. Nothing else works. But we're going to circle back to that. So yeah, sometimes if you just like, you can say it to them, but if saying it to them doesn't work, at least say it to yourself. Like, I don't have to feel shame about that. I had a valid reason for doing that. So just at least have those conversations with yourself if you can't have it with the person saying it. Enmeshment, that's sort of like a toxic parent thing. It's when, like, they put all their emotions on you. Like, you kind of feel responsible for their emotions. You feel responsible for mom's anger. You feel responsible for mom's sadness. You're always trying to manage their emotions. They're just dumping on you, right? Like, they're burdening you with their emotions. Like, a parent is burdening you with their emotions as a child. Another word for it is like emotional incest. I think that's kind of like a more extreme version where, like, they treat you like a spouse in terms of the conversations that they have with you, right? Like, they put these big adult problems on you. Like, they confide in you about these big adult problems. That's not fair for a child, right? Like, it's not fair for a child to feel like they're responsible for adult problems. Yeah, so energy vampires I want to talk about for a second. Vampires are real. They don't fly around and have sharp teeth and suck blood, okay? They suck your energy dry, okay? This is like an example of narcissists, but not only narcissists. They feed off guilt and shame. They feed off of triggering you. They feed off of big emotional responses. So, somebody maybe says something you don't like, and you say, hey, I don't like that. You try to stay like an adult in the situation, right? Like, you try to be kind, and you try to be reasonable, and you try to stand up for yourself in a respectful way, right? And that doesn't work, right? They just keep pushing your buttons. And then you go into like adult mode where you're like, okay, now I'm going to set rules. Now I'm going to set boundaries. If you say that to me again, this is going to happen. And they keep pushing you, right? They keep pushing you until you go into child mode. And then you have this huge emotional reaction. You have like rage, and you have sadness, and you're screaming and you're crying. Like, they do that because they're feeding off of it. Like, it's like energy for them. Same with guilt and shame. Like, if you just like let them tell you you were wrong, or you're bad, or it's all you, like, that's what they feed off of. So once you know that that's what's happening, you can kind of like cut them off. Like you can kind of just consciously be like, I'm not going to feed this. And sometimes that means no contact. It depends on who you're dealing with. If you decide that you want to go no contact with someone, that is so hard to do, right? Like dealing with these people becomes like an addiction, because there's like this cycle of reward and then punishment, it's a very addictive pattern. It is like an addiction when you're in relationships with these people. So breaking addictions is hard. And a lot of the times you want to go no contact and you just can't. You just can't because you're addicted. So the best thing I can say there is just take one day at a time. Just take one day at a time. It doesn't have to be, I'm not going to talk to this person ever again, because that's like a huge commitment, right? And then if you fail at that, which is very easy to fail at something that's supposed to last forever, then you're going to feel shame about it. That's bad for your energy. It's going to keep you stuck. So just do one day at a time. It can just be today, I'm not going to talk to them. Tomorrow, we'll see. It takes about 2 months of no contact to really feel like there's no pull anymore, based on what I've read. Another thing is, we get so stuck on who they could be, right? Who these people could be. Like, we see glimmers of all this potential, and we want to fight for that. We want to wait for that. But we don't know if that's coming, right? Like, we don't know if they're gonna change. So I think you have to base your decisions off of what's sustainable right now. And those consequences, you can think of those consequences as an act of compassion for them, because they're not going to change unless they have a reason to, right? Like, if you stay in these relationships with these people, it's kind of enabling them to not make any changes. It's making the present situation too tolerable for them. And we have a hard time doing what's best for us, but if you can kind of switch the script and think of it as like, I'm doing this for them, like tough love, like I don't want to enable them, that's actually getting in the way of their process. If you see it as a form of compassion, I think that helps. If you can't go no contact, if you want to go no contact but you can't, there's also a strategy called gray rock, which is where you're just as detached as you can be. You just try to keep all emotions out of your conversations. You try to give short yes or no answers. You're as no contact as you can be, and then if you have to talk to them, it's just a simple yes, no. Give them as little information as possible. Just keep it as short and simple as possible. Another important question, I think, is, are they aware of what they're doing? That might be a hard question to answer, but I think that's worth thinking about too when you're trying to decide, like, what route you want to go with these people is, are they aware of what they're doing? Another thing I think we can get stuck with these people is a lot of I think maybe all the time, these people have trauma, right? People who do toxic things probably had something happen to them at some point that made them not normal. And we go into like this rescuer mode where we want to help them, we want to save them. And it's almost not even about like we're trying to save them from themselves in the present. It's like we're trying to save them from what happened to them in the past. Like we're there in the past with them, trying to save that helpless, innocent child that they used to be. And we can't, because we're not in the past. It's like we're trying to go back in the past and save them, and we can't, because we're not in the past. And it sucks, and it's hard, and the only one who can really save them is them. That's another thing. Like, people, we want love to be enough for people to change, and it's not enough. I don't think, in my experience, I mean, I'm sure there's stories out there, but in my experience, I do not think love is enough to change someone. We like believe in the story that it is. And in my experience, it isn't. And that's really hard. The only thing that's going to change a really toxic person, I think, is if they seek treatment. It can't be us. We're going to want to be their therapist. We're going to try to be like, give them talk therapy and help them process things. It can't be us. It can't be people who are in this relationship with these people. They need professional help. So I think if you've tried advocating for yourself, it doesn't work, there's a pattern that you're stuck in, nothing you try makes any difference, those people need professional help. There's no amount of love that's going to change that. I feel awful saying that to people because, like, I feel like I'm being discouraging. And again, this is just my opinion, but yeah, like, nothing's going to change until something changes, right? And the decision point probably isn't going to be you, especially if you've already been trying. So the decision point's going to have to be something else, and it can't be something else until you get out of the way and just let them self-destruct however it's going to happen. Another thing with self-destructive people is if you try to keep them from being self-destructive, like, then, like, you're getting in between, like, the gun and the target, right? Like, it is not a good place to be. Self-destructive people, you really have to get out of their way. Because it's all about control for them. Like, if they feel like they don't have control, then they're just going to self-sabotage even more to get it back. It's a really awful pattern to watch. What else do I have here? This feels like a heavier episode. Yeah, that's everything. So the last thing I wrote down was, I heard this in Codependence Anonymous, and I felt like really annoyed when I heard it, but I'm annoyed by it and also think it's helpful. And it's hurt people, healed people. So a hurt person is just going to keep hurting people until they've done something to heal themselves besides just listening to you. So if they're not doing the work on their own, the pattern's just going to keep going. They're not going to change. If you're just now realizing that there's a toxic pattern in your life, it doesn't mean you have to, like, automatically, like, go there. Like, they're never going to get better. Like, this is a point where you, like, start setting boundaries and you start having conversations and you see what happens. You start asking those questions. Do they know what they're doing? Are they trying to change? How much awareness do they have? I think is important. And yeah, that's all I have. So I would love to hear your thoughts. Thanks for listening. And I'll talk to you guys soon.